all of you to join us in today's CFISS and Dhaka Tribune present roundtable discussion on Bangladesh-India relations. We're going to start today's program with a panel discussion followed by a Q&A session. And for today's panel, we are really honored to have His Excellency Mr. Vikram Kumar Doraisamy, High Commissioner, Indian High Commission to Bangladesh, Mr. M. Humayun Kabir, President of BEI and former Ambassador and Foreign Secretary, Government of Bangladesh, and Ms. Aisha Kabir, Head of English Web, Prothom Alo. To moderate today's panel discussion and the Q&A afterward, we have Mr. Zafar Subhan, Editor-in-Chief, Dhaka Tribune, and Commodore Muhammad Nurul Afsar, Chairman and Founder of CFISS. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to request our Honorable Moderator to start our panel discussion. Afsar, sir.
Thank you very much. His Excellency High Commissioner of India, Mr. Vikram Doraisamy, respected panelist, Ambassador Humayun Kabir, and our media personality, Ms. Aisha Kabir. Excellencies, respected editor of Dhaka Tribune, Mr. Zafar Subhan, and today's distinguished audience and participants, Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. Welcome to today's seminar on Bangladesh-India relations. Our think tank, Central Foundation for International and Strategic Studies, and Dhaka Tribune have been arranging jointly a series of seminars on the issues of contemporary relevance. And today's event is one of such kind. And I think all this will help us in snowballing of ideas and thoughts and giving us dispassionate views on different issues. Now, coming to today's topic, ladies and gentlemen, let me remind you about a very significant moment of the history of this subcontinent. It was the H hour when India was getting freedom from the yoke of British imperialism in 15 August 1947. In that great moment, Jawaharlal Nehru said with due eloquence, and I quote, he said, "Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to the life of freedom. A moment comes, which comes but rarely in history, and when the soul of a nation, long suppressed, find utterance." I unquote. So the same enthusiasm, the same euphoria, and the exuberance, with the same exuberance, the Bangladesh emerged as a free and independent national state in the world map under the leadership of a father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, 16 December 1971. As you know, our people who have been long suppressed by the Pakistanis could find a ray of hope and a sense of purpose for the life. And here it will be very worth mentioning about a thing that at that time people realized that based on just religious identity, you cannot go for building a nation. And most significantly, it was a paradigm shift in the mindset of the nation and people. Since then, our people started thinking about differently and have given due importance to secularism and to cultural identity. So this narrative is very much important for us, and also it is important for our neighbors. In the post-independence periods, the friendship between India and Bangladesh has gone from strength to strength, given the historic, cultural, and economic ties between Bangladesh and India. The two countries have always been more than neighbors, sharing not only common borders and rivers, but also culture, language, and heritage that was bounded by the shared memories and sacrifices during the Bangladesh Liberation War. And Bangladesh gratefully remembers the help of the India and the Indian people, which was extended during the War of Liberation. Ladies and gentlemen, now we are at the crossroads of a very changing and dynamic strategic environment. World events are changing very rapidly. Ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine and its impact on European security, energy, economy. Then on the other hand, rise of India and China, and recent development with regard to Indo-Pacific framework, Quad, or AUKUS are giving new impetus for us for thinking about the global order. How the ongoing war between the Russia and Ukraine will end, whether it will assume the form of a protracted war, or will there be any scope for negotiation or engagement between the warring factions, or it will lead to the proliferation of nuclear weapons or arms race, or how far the much discussed global recession will be true. All are the million-dollar questions. And in this backdrop, I think Bangladesh and India should think carefully and show renewed strength of cooperation. Since the independence of Bangladesh, as you know, Bangladesh's foreign policy orientation was defined by the invaluable dictum of the Bangabandhu, friendship to all, malice to none. And our Honorable Prime Minister has maintained that motto as the touchstone for our foreign policy conduct. It has helped us in pursuing our national interests without compromising the underlying values and principles of our statehood and identity as a sovereign state. Keeping a balanced approach, Bangladesh has always strived for not to be subsumed in the security equation of the others. And this was the hallmark of our diplomacy. In this milieu, please carefully notice that our relation with the big powers was not based on the zero-sum principle, that my relationship with any big power is at the cost of the other or at the detriment of the others. Whatever we have did, as all other nations are doing for pursuing their national interests. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to flag a few points here for the discussion. In its 50th year, the world is witnessing a sharp new Bangladesh. And for three underlying facts, we can say that. Firstly, due to geography, Bangladesh sits at the crossroad of BRI or Indo-Pacific strategy. And due to its proximity to Siliguri corridor and Malacca state, Bangladesh is definitely immensely important for our neighbors. Secondly, Bangladesh is the second largest country in the world. Sorry, I'm not telling in terms of geography, but in terms of the population. And hence, it's a huge market. And definitely, it is related with the also economic interest also. A country that has started its journey from the ashes of the fire of the war, devastation of the war, has now emerged as a phoenix bird of development wonder. Upcoming inauguration of the Podda Bridge is definitely a testimony in this regard. Thirdly, our geopolitical significance comes from our continuous contribution to the global peace and security, be it in the form of presence in the peacekeeping or giving shelter to the Rohingyas. Hence, Bangladesh demands a renewed mindset from the international community. Winston Churchill used to say, the longer you look back, the further you can look forward. Hence, if history is of any use, it inspires both Bangladesh and India to go for further consideration the friendship between us. Today's strategic landscape is so vast that we have a lot of avenues where we can cooperate and set new example for the world. We have enhanced our connectivity, our trade, our cooperation in different fields. Our people-to-people contact has also been increased. And what we need, a little bit more boost. And of course, I will flag here 2 points where we need extra attention. And I think where the sensitivity of the people of the Bangladesh is related with regard to the water sharing of Tista and the solving the Rohingya crisis. Here I want to mention about a very important point. While delivering a speech in the University of Dhaka, Honorable Minister Narendra Modi said very succinctly, forcefully and emotionally, and I quote, he said in Hindi, "हम पास पास भी हैं हम साथ साथ भी हैं. Very important word, very important sentence. Meaning that we are not only living side by side as neighbors, we are also beside one another in good and bad times as two good friends. And I think we need to emphasize on this point. So with this introductory remarks, I once again warmly welcome today's panel members, our guests for sparing their valuable time and gracing today's seminar with their kind presence. So without further ado, may I now request the respected editor of Dhaka Tribune, Mr. Zafar, to speak a few words. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Commodore. I think that's a very able introduction to the interesting discussion we have before us. The only challenge, of course, for me as a co-moderator is in these events is speaking after you and finding something new and fresh to add to my introduction. But what I'd like to do is just, as you have done, set the scene a little and provide a little bit of context for the issues I think we can address in today's discussion, which would make it a little bit different and perhaps valuable compared to other discussions which may have happened in recent weeks and months. And so before we turn the mic over to our distinguished panelists, let me just say a few words by of scene setting, if you will. Now, we hold this panel discussion at a critical time for Bangladesh-India relations. But the truth is that there has never been, nor will there ever be a time when the relations are not critical. It was always thus, and it will always remain thus, like it or not. The destiny of our two countries is inextricably linked through history and geography, and honestly through simple common sense. It has long been recognized that the question should not be, indeed cannot be, whether India and Bangladesh should have warm and cordial relations, but what form these relations should take and how best to cement them. Today, what I would like to focus my introduction here on is a clear-eyed look at where the relationship is at present compared to where it has been in the past and how best to forge a future for the common good of our two countries and our two peoples. Now, I'm going to start with my observations and analyses, which our distinguished panelist, His Excellency High Commissioner Doraiswamy, may well take issue with, but I suspect we will agree far more than we will disagree. Nevertheless, if we agree on everything, then that would be a dull discussion. Now, there is no gainsaying the role mentioned by Commodore Afsar of the role that India played in Bangladesh's independence. And it was from that partnership that the future relationship was born. The ties that bind us are strong, and the connections between our two peoples are deep. But 50 years is a long time, and much has happened since. Let's look first at where the relationship is at present at a government-to-government level. Now, what I'm about to say may come is controversial, but as I said, I'm a newspaper editor, not a diplomat, so I'm going to go right ahead and say it. I think the simple truth is that however much we may try to pretend otherwise, who is in power in each country matters. Now, we may try and pretend that the relationship is between India and Bangladesh, or the Indian people and the Bangladeshi people. And while this is true, and in fact a truism so far as it goes, it is also true that it matters whether the Congress or the BJP are in power in India, or whether the Awami League or the BNP is in power in Bangladesh. We try to pretend that it doesn't matter, but it does. Now, there is a special relationship between Congress and the Awami League. This relationship was born due to the seminal role played by Indira Gandhi in 1971 as the Indian Prime Minister, and the subsequent warm personal ties between the Bangladeshi PM and her family and senior members of the Congress High Command, such as Pranab Mukherjee. The Congress has always had a special relationship with Bangladesh, and more specifically, the Awami League. The current BJP government is very different. Now, at the end of the day, statecraft is statecraft, and the BJP government respects and recognizes both Bangladesh and the Bangladeshi government as a good neighbor and ally, indeed in some ways India's foremost major ally. And there is respect for what the Awami League government has accomplished over the past 12 years. And at a personal level, I believe that the Indian PM has a high regard and respect for the Bangladeshi PM. Nevertheless, things are not quite the same as when Congress is in power, and I think there's no point in us trying to pretend that it is. Let's be blunt. Anti-Bangladesh sentiment has been a cornerstone of the BJP appeal in West Bengal and the Northeast, and this is not just an electoral strategy. There are large swathes of the Indian population who do have negative feelings about Bangladesh, and many, if not most, have found homes in the ruling alliance, at least as voters. Now, this goes both ways. And I'll get to that in a second, but I think I myself have been going to India for 40 years since I was a schoolboy, and I was a student in India. And nowadays I do run into many more Indians with much negative to say and think about Bangladesh than was the case before. I see it on Twitter, I see it on other social media. This certainly exists. And let's not pretend that it doesn't also go both ways. If there's anti-Bangladesh sentiment in India, there's anti-Indian sentiment in Bangladesh. And we do see it, and we talk about it. We try not to talk about it, but it's there. And 2 decades ago, I remember Kuldeep Nayar, this was when I first came back to Bangladesh in 2003, he'd written about this. He said that the anti-Indian sentiment in Bangladesh is so strong you can taste it. This was in 2003. I would hope that today in 2022, the sentiment is not so strong as he identified in 2003, but we would be fooling ourselves if we didn't recognize that there was this undercurrent among certain segments of the Bangladeshi population, as there is on the other side of the border. Now, it's likely that all of those of you sitting here who took the time to attend this discussion, that you, all of us here, are of the opinion that India and Bangladesh are natural allies, that we need to strengthen our ties, that an adversarial relationship between both countries helps no one. But we also need to understand that this viewpoint is by no means universal on either side of the border. And that it is only by recognizing this and addressing it that we can move forward. So, what are the steps to deepen ties? I think, as I've mentioned, we need to open our eyes and recognize and acknowledge the antipathy that exists on both sides of the border. We need confidence-building measures on both sides. The bottom line is, we need to build up Bangladesh in the eyes of India, and India in the eyes of Bangladesh. And how do we do that? Now, the media has played a big role and has a big role to play. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, the media is thousands of independent players and cannot be coordinated or corralled. And I say unfortunately, but actually, when you think about it, it's probably a good thing that the media is not a single entity and that the media in both countries does exist as thousands of independent players. Nevertheless, the media does matter. And whatever we can do to try and advance a positive mindset in the media would be useful. From my perspective, I've always said if you could see more Bangladeshi talking heads, Bangladeshi columnists, Bangladeshi voices in the Indian media, that would be very helpful. I see Ashik is here. He's one of the very few Bangladeshis who I see regularly featured in the Indian media, Ashikur Rahman. He writes for the Indian Express as well as other newspapers. And we would like to see more of that. Because I think that is a great way of really hearing one another's voices and introducing each other to the other country. Now, the more we intertwine ourselves, the more unthinkable any kind of antipathy becomes. India does have, in certain segments of its society, a fear of Bangladeshi migrants. We see this in the political discourse. I won't really get into that issue, but the point I'll make here is that the kind of Bangladeshi who is at risk for crossing a border, it's not the kind of Bangladeshi who has a passport and can get a visa. Therefore, the two issues should not really be related together, and it should be much easier for those who wish to travel to India from Bangladesh with a visa to do so. Now, I know His Excellency will say that they have opened up many consular offices, and the number of Bangladeshis traveling to India is probably greater now than it has been in the past. But what I would say is, whatever the number is, double it, triple it. Make it easy. The more Bangladeshis get to India, the more Indians get to Bangladesh, the better our relations are going to be. How many Bangladeshis study in India today? Whatever the number is, double it. triple it, quadruple it. Same goes for medical tourism. Same goes for business. Whatever we can do to allow ties across the border to be deepened is really what's needed. One of my long-standing ideas has always been surrounding IPL. If you look at the NBA or Major League Baseball in India, in America, they have Canadian teams. So there's no reason, it seems to me, why the IPL couldn't have Bangladeshi teams. I know we have the economy to support it, and I think that's really something which would send an incredible message, is if you have a franchise from Dhaka or Chittagong who is actually part of the IPL, or at the very least, if that's something which may not be doable in the short run, why don't we play a few games here? The idea is basically at a soft level try and make the border more porous, not in such a way that India has to worry about migrants from Bangladesh. I do understand the political concern in India, but there are many other ways to make that border more porous in such a way that person-to-person ties are improved. These things matter. Now, you'll notice that I haven't mentioned Tista, I haven't mentioned border killings, NRC, CAA. I don't want to sound the same note. I'm sure you've heard a lot of this in the past. I mean, I think the problem here is deeper. And I think we need to really address it at a mindset level. And I would actually say right now, in 2022, it seems to me that the problem, and His Excellency may disagree, lies largely actually on the Indian side more so than the Bangladeshi side. Now, this wasn't always the case. Okay, I remember when I came back to Bangladesh in 2003, and I was shocked at the obstructionism of the then Bangladesh government and indeed the attitudes of large swathes of the intelligentsia. But I feel that things have changed in Bangladesh significantly from 2 decades back, but I feel that now the pendulum has swung in the other direction. But that said, you know, India is in the midst of a major transformation itself. It's a very different country with a very different ethos than what it used to be. And Bangladeshis do wonder what the impact of this will be on Bangladesh and attitudes towards Bangladesh in India's relations with Bangladesh. I will say that one potential worry that we have is that as India becomes less and less secular, that the same may happen in Bangladesh, which would be a catastrophe, not just for Bangladesh, but for India too. India has one neighbor with which it does not have good relations on one border. The costs of having two are really unthinkable. But the paradox is that it has been India's secularism which has allowed Bangladesh to remain secular. And the question needs to be asked that as India becomes less secular in its ethos and outlook, what are the implications, the impact on Bangladesh, and then the corollary impact again on India? I don't know if anyone in India is asking this question, but it's a question that ought to be asked. And finally, I should point out that Indo-Bangladesh relations do not exist in a vacuum. This is something Commodore Absar had mentioned earlier. For many years, they were subject to Cold War realities, and now as we enter a period of a new Cold War, it would be naive to think that our relations will not be impacted. Bangladesh has always survived by balancing our relations, not just between India and China, but also with US, Russia, Japan. We have no choice. And I believe that India understands and respects this. Nevertheless, one potential issue could be that as global tensions and rivalries deepen, that Bangladesh will be asked, if not expected, to choose. And it needs to be understood that this can never, unfortunately, happen. Just as Bangladesh should and can never take a position against India, it is similarly, albeit in a lesser way perhaps, constrained from taking any such stand against any other big country. Bangladesh's survival and growth and prosperity depends on us remaining studiously neutral. As Commodore Absar mentioned, friendship to all and malice to none, the words of the father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, a precept that looks never more prescient and visionary than it does today. At the end of the day, there is no alternative to friendship between our two countries. Is a basic principle: when two neighbors are adversarial, no one wins. The benefits to cooperation over confrontation, I think, are self-evident. Given India's fractious relationship with Pakistan on its other border, and indeed border tensions with China, all the more reason why it cannot afford any kind of antipathy in its relationship towards Bangladesh. Similarly, surrounded as we are on three sides by India, it would be the rankest folly for us to think that we could forge a future or a foreign policy in which India would not play a central role. Good relations between our two countries are not just win-win, they are all there is for both of us. On that note, Vikram, let me pass it on to you.
Thank you. So let me begin first of all by thanking Commodore Absar for the hospitality of his think tank, and Zafar, of course, for his friendship and for having the Dhaka Tribune to put this together. Let me also greet the number of distinguished friends out here, in particular my old friend, the Ambassador of Palestine. We go back some 26 years as really old and close friends. My French colleague who's here, Aisha ji, and of course the distinguished ambassadors of the Bangladesh Foreign Service were present here, and to, of course, each one of you. Now, of course, a format such as this or an event such as this puts me in a somewhat awkward position, because if it is a completely open discussion, then there are limits to what I can say. If it is a completely Chatham House discussion, there are limits to how much Zafar and others in the media are interested, because no headline, no copy. So if on the third hand, and if you had three hands, if I were to say the kind of stuff that would make copy, I would probably be moving from here very fast. In fact, in a day or two's time. So this is a complex situation, but within the limits of what I can say, let me say a few things to set the discussion going. And I'll try and be brief because I think it's more educative to have a conversation rather than a monologue. First, let me not start with the contextual point, because I think let me end with that, since it's already been made about context. And I agree with that contextual point. Let me start with the obvious point, which is simply that if you were to look at the last decade of our relationship, in particular the last, say, 6 or 7 years, from the Indian perspective, two things come out to me very clearly. And I'm speaking as somebody who's actually dealt with this relationship hands-on for 4 years, 2 here and 2 in Delhi before this, and in the Prime Minister's office in the 2000s, which, as Zafar agrees, was a fairly toxic period in our relationship. Things have changed materially, dramatically and tangibly. I know it is fashionable, and Zafar typified it today, if I may say so, in seeing the glass as half full, primarily from the Bangladesh side. But I assure you that the way we see it, things have changed fundamentally. And fundamentally in the sense that there is belief that delivery of commitments that have been made on both sides are actually happening. Things have actually moved forward on things that were next to impossible to contemplate doing. Remember, 1974 was when we came to an agreement on our boundary. It was 2015 when we actually exchanged enclaves, adverse possessions, etc. Those of you who haven't actually tracked this problem have no idea how complex this is. We were actually talking about handing over 110 acres of territory of India, what was then considered to be Indian territory, and about 70 or less, a little less than 70 acres of Bangladesh territory to India. Handing over territory has been the hardest thing for nations to do, particularly for recent Westphalian nations. This was supposed to be a game changer that would change our relationship, that would change the rhetoric about the relationship. Has it? I leave that to you. The maritime boundary, we agreed to go to the tribunal, the Permanent Court of Arbitration of the under the law of the sea. That too was supposed to be a game changer. We actually, if you look at it, and let me not cite contrary examples, but you know which ones these are. We actually have abided by the judgment of the tribunal, both countries. Our boundary, our maritime boundary, stands delimited because it is part of the regulations of the tribunal that this is not subject to reinterpretation or to subsequent dispute. So we have both accepted whatever the maritime, the PCA gave us. Right? We have substantially moved forward on trade. I know this is a subject that people in Bangladesh question, but this is something that we can discuss and debate further. But the trade relationship has significantly changed. We have substantially moved forward on movement of people. Zafar, before COVID, 2.8 million people from Bangladesh visited India. We issued 1.7 million visas in Bangladesh. This is more than the visa operations we do in our third and fourth countries in the world combined. We have 16 visa centers in Bangladesh, in a country of 170 million people. Sure, that may not be much, but 16 million. We would be 16 centers. This we would be happy to increase further, except that in the number of other places that have sought visa centers, the problem is we can't guarantee more than 100 visits a day. Economics is the important determinant of it, because the problem would then be that the cost per unit of servicing a passport would increase beyond the price that people in Bangladesh would be happy to pay for. So we don't want to make it a problem there. We now have cross-border bus services, train services, air services, and we have for the last 4 years been repeatedly offering an open skies arrangement also to Bangladesh. We are ready to do more rail services, except that capacity here in Bangladesh Railway doesn't exist to service greater rail connectivity. We are ready to open up many more border points, except that there isn't reciprocation of capacity. And this is a capacity issue. I'm not making a political point here. To open up more border points for movement of people and movement of goods. So on every metric, if you see, the relationship isn't the same that it was even a decade ago. The other big change that I will say from the Indian perspective, and I'm speaking now as an Indian civil servant, not as the High Commissioner in Bangladesh, I have seen how the relationship about Bangladesh in India is bipartisan. Whatever our domestic constituencies may be, there can be little doubt that the governments of India, whether they have been Congress or BJP governments, have said the same thing about Bangladesh. When the Prime Minister of India came here last year, please see his speech. What he said about Bangladesh was everything that any previous Prime Minister would have said and more. He said the points that he made, and you quoted it, Commodore, he made the points that sometimes friends in Bangladesh are sensitive about. He emphasized that the liberation war is the Bangladesh liberation war. He talked about India only assisting it. He did not claim it to be India's Pakistan war, which it was in a sense, in a different sense. But it was the liberation war of Bangladesh as far as the Eastern Theatre was concerned, and he made that point explicitly. He talked about the importance of Bangladesh to India. BJP chief ministers, including in Assam, have made this point publicly, that prosperity and progress in the Northeast have been the direct result of Bangladesh's cooperation under Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina in dealing with insurgency that, let's admit it, flourished here with state support till the 2011s. Now, 40 years. But it has been acknowledged, thanked, and appreciated, including by chief ministers of all political parties, whether the CPM in Tripura, the BJP in Assam, or the Congress when they were in power in Delhi. So the point that I'm trying to make is we now have a stage of bipartisan consensus about the importance of the Bangladesh relationship, which, let me also say here, is not quite the case in Bangladesh. So I don't know how you want to make the comparative metric, Zafar, but my own sense is that we do not have a bipartisan consensus about good relations with India. We can disagree about individual issues, and we do disagree about individual issues. We wouldn't be South Asians if we didn't. We are, in many ways, fully capable of being completely disagreeable about everything. But this doesn't prevent us from at least agreeing on the broad metrics, as you set out, that the importance of the relationship needs to be accepted. Let me make a second set of initial points, which is the first point that I wanted to make, in a sense, is that the relationship stands transformed. The key point that I want to make is that we are in a position today that is unique. Our relationship is better than it has ever been. That doesn't mean that we can rest on our laurels and say that things are fine and we don't need to do anything further. Of course, we need to do much more together. And I think leadership on both sides have clearly and sort of publicly acknowledged the importance of doing more. And we are committed to doing more. So my second set of points on this. The second set of points is that we need to try and make the relationship far more effective in terms of enhancing interconnections between us. By this, I don't just mean connectivity. I mean everything that connects the two countries. Zafar mentioned some of this. I mean economics, I mean investment, I mean movement of people, I mean the capacity to exchange cultural products, have films come to each other's countries. Now, all of these things need to be opened up. Many of these things haven't yet been opened up and should be opened up. And we would be very happy to see this happen. I would, in particular, single out something like, for instance, films. I don't know how many of you are aware, but films from India actually aren't allowed to be screened in movie halls here. It's not a question of import duties or import quotas. They're not allowed. We would be very happy even if a small number is permitted, because anyway they're coming in. They're coming in on OTT platforms. They're coming in on pirated discs and stuff like that. And it's probably a good idea because it'll help build the number of auditoriums in which films can be screened, thereby creating a larger market for films to be produced domestically in Bangladesh. We had a similar negative reaction when Hollywood films came in a big way into India, including in dubbed form. But the net result of opening it up has been an explosion of the cinema sort of sector in India, which is now one of our big revenue earners in the entertainment sector. That's just by way of an example. My last set of initial points. I think it's important actually to focus on narrative building, and I completely agree with Zafar here. We've not really focused enough on narrative building. Quite frankly, this is something that needs to be done by more than just foreign offices. Bangladesh and India have a remarkable number of consular presences in each other's country. You have a mission in Delhi and in 5 other cities, Agartala, Guwahati, Bombay, Calcutta, of course, and Chennai, which has just recently been opened. We have presence in Khulna, Sylhet, Chittagong, and Rajshahi, and of course Dhaka, which is a lot. For countries like us to devote these kind of resources is a lot. But there are still limits to what can be done purely through the state system. There is need for the existing think tank universe, the existing socio-cultural universe to actually work together to increase the number of people who are writing for each other's television, each other's newspapers, for television stations to get more talking heads on board. I'm not necessarily sure that always works. What I see of television shows in my country, and sometimes if I may be blunt, in your country, suggests to me that talking heads and social media are about the worst things to look at in terms of how you want to see a narrative being built. But there is space for much more narrative building to be done, and I think we could easily do this. We have the tools in place that will enable the relationship to move to a different era and a different level. The question is, we need to be able to ensure that we are taking public opinion with us by showing them why intertwining ourselves makes us inseparable, and that this is a good thing. So, for the longest time there has been this rhetoric that the more we do stuff together, the less will be Bangladesh's independence. That is just not true. I mean, in a connected sense, in any case, the opportunities for growth that Bangladesh enjoys from connecting with the world, including India, suggests to me that better integration with the world, better integration with production chains, global value production chains, indeed leveraging your location to get even Indian businesses to come here and invest for production, not just for export, but even back into India, to me strikes me as being obvious common sense. It also strikes me as being obvious common sense that we should look at ensuring that we have Bangladesh's traditional strength in terms of connectivity utilized. But you wouldn't be surprised you would be surprised, maybe you're not here, but I am when I first came here, the number of people who think that this is a card that you should play at the last stages of diplomacy, which of course, if you're a diplomat, there is no last stage. So we'll be playing this forever then, waiting to play this connectivity card. To me, it makes no sense. This is economic benefit waiting to happen for Bangladesh. And it is not happening because it is, not being allowed to happen. So that is about as candidly as I can say that we need to do much more, because the rhetoric portion and the actual fulfillment of opportunity is not happening. We need to be able to do much more to make this work. And this is down to all of us. It's not just for the government to do this. It is for civil society, for media, for opinion makers to make the extra effort to actually realize on the commitment of India-Bangladesh relations. When you do that, and when people do benefit from the relationship, that's when negativity reduces. You can't reduce negativity by people like me sermonizing about it. It changes when people like you find relevance, either a business relevance, a business case relevance, or a think tank case relevance in doing business or activities with the other side. That dynamic won't change. And finally, as to the question of our having a negative relationship with Bangladesh, I mean, as I was trying to suggest, that should be taken out of your minds right away. I mean, I don't know how many words we can, at what levels we can continue to reassure Bangladesh that we prioritize the friendship with Bangladesh. Just now, my foreign minister told your foreign minister in so many words that in our neighborhood first policy, Bangladesh comes first. Now, I don't know how much more clearly we can say that. There is no other way I can formulate it that makes it more clear to anybody else. And as to how our nations evolve internally, I think perhaps we shouldn't necessarily believe everything we read on social media. I think social media is perhaps the most hostile town hall going. I don't mean to beat up on social media, but I haven't seen social media in any country talking about anybody else in a way that sounds particularly encouraging. So if you were to look at social media, then I'm pretty sure you would come up with terrible thoughts about what Indians think about Bangladesh or any particular community. But I can tell you it's the same the other way around too. And I don't think that this serves any useful purpose. But social media has essentially allowed people to bring out the worst in their own system and not feel obliged by social or other consequence, because you can hide behind an assumed name. Believe me, I've had people snipe at me also on my social media account. I know what that's like. It takes a lot of effort not to retaliate. Let me conclude with that. I would be very happy to take substantive questions on this. And I sincerely hope I haven't said too much. And if I have, I'll ask the TV camera guys to cut those things out. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I think you did a great job of really responding to the points which were raised by the two moderators. Ambassador Kabir, if I could move over to you and get your thoughts on what His Excellency has said and get your ideas and feedback.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. High Commissioner Vikram Doraisamy, Commander Nurul Afsar, Zafar Savan, Aisha Kabir, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I should begin by thanking the Dhaka Tribune and also the Central Foundation for International and Strategic Studies for hosting such a, I would say, very interesting discussion. Already a great deal has been said. So what I would like to see is just to give you a perspective about how we see, or how I see personally, let me put it that way. Because I don't represent anybody, I represent myself, so I can share my thoughts. Well, I should say that what a commissioner has said, I broadly agree with him on the fact that the relationship between Bangladesh and India has changed significantly during the last 10-15 years' time. I had the opportunity to serve in India in the early 90s and late 90s and early 20s. So the way both sides looked at each other and the way we look at each other now is very different, qualitatively, I should say. Why? There are few substantive elements that contributed to that, and High Commissioner has rightly pointed out that some of the irritants that really bothered us have been taken out of the equation. For example, the border issue. Border issue, I'm talking about the larger issue, not the border killing. Border was a problem segment. And now, since the border on both sides. I mean, on the maritime side and also on the land border side. That has been taken care of, and I think this is a good thing, very positive thing by any standard. But now the question that remains is, has it become peaceful? Now, how to make it peaceful is a challenge, and that's what we are struggling with. And I think still we are trying to address that issue by fits and starts here and there, and so on and so forth. But I think we can take a larger or more comprehensive view. Border problems or border irritations are there in many countries, and they've been creative. So I think from my perspective, I would like, since I served on the both sides, so my idea would be that why don't we make a problem border into a border of peace and prosperity? That can be done. And some political commitment is required to do that, because whether we recognize that or not, the fact is that borders on both sides are the lagging regimes. No economic development there. People they don't have any gainful employment, no security, so they tend to engage in different kinds of activities, and that creates political problems as well as humanitarian problem on both sides. So that border issue has largely been addressed, but still there is some venom on the tail. We can address that, and it's one unfinished work for me, because I had the opportunity to move around the border and I saw the real nature of the problem. So that's one good thing that has happened. And another good thing I should see, I agree with Vikram, is the fact that both the countries have changed. Our economies have changed, or are changing now. And that changing economies are creating a new dynamic, or real dynamic at the grassroots level. And our relationship is also transforming because of that. For example, our trade with India was minuscule. To me, honestly, Vikram has mentioned, High Commissioner has mentioned that I'm not very happy going at $1 billion, because, I mean, 1 billion for Bangladesh, where we are having $40 billion trade, it should be more, because India is growing market, but compared to that, we are not getting that amount of, or that extent of access to the Indian market. And yesterday, before yesterday, I should say, that at the JCC meeting, our foreign minister has raised a lot of issues, and in my view, some of the small issues are creating a lot of negative vibrations. For example, Honorable Prime Minister Bangladesh Prime Minister requested Indian Prime Minister back in 2017 to withdraw the countervailing duty on the jute goods. Bangladesh, how much jute goods do we export to India? And even as a gesture of courtesy, that should have been done by now, and it has not been done. Then other export items, some of the export potential items that we have, were actually facing para-tariff, non-tariff barriers. Now, India, I think, given the fact that Indian economy is now almost $2 trillion, export by how many Bangladesh is exporting in any case $1 billion, and within that frame, how much can we export, or what is our capacity? So creating barriers, either a non-tariff or para-tariff barrier, doesn't really give a good impression about the intention or the, I would say, mechanisms available to promote Bangladesh-India economic relationship. Then again, we are talking about Indian investment in Bangladesh. Bangladesh has designated 2 economic zones for India. How much Indian investment has come here? I mean, why the Indians, are they still nervous? If they're nervous, we need to look at that and try to work that out. Now, unless the Indian investment comes in a big way to Bangladesh, there is no way that the trade imbalance that we have can be reduced. So this investment, Indian investment in Bangladesh, can create stake in our relationship. And that is still missing. So we are still trading. And in India, as you have rightly mentioned, in India, a Bangladesh lobby is being created because now Indian businessmen understands the value of Bangladesh as a export destination. Indian export is growing at a very high rate in Bangladesh. So why they shouldn't be trying to have a good relationship with Bangladesh? And they are the ones that really now is trying as a group to promote good relationship between Bangladesh and India. I think that more could be done. And if we can create mutual stakes, economic stakes with each other, definitely that would be very helpful. So economic relationship has also transformed, and the connectivity that we are, I think High Commissioner has mentioned about the connectivity that we are talking about, that also can have multiplier kind of value, and which I don't see that yet we have come. We have horizontally we have expanded. Horizontally, we are talking about a lot of relationship, and I agree, and I understand that our relationship in many sectors have enlarged now compared to what it was 20 years back. But now the question that I have here is, what about the depth of relationship? Zafar has mentioned that do we understand each other? Or are we okay with each other, comfortable with each other? So there, I think, few issues should come, and we should be open about that. Now, Bangladesh-India relationship, we can look at it from just purely bilateral relationship. Yes, that's one way of looking at it. But can we really limit that into bilateral frame? My sense is that Bangladesh-India bilateral frame requires some elements beyond that, For example, water issue. How do we resolve the water issue without the involvement of other third or fourth parties? So, and it's not a question of sharing the water. It's a question of using the water for other purposes, other gainful purposes. And also the climate issue is now getting involved in that. People are talking about the impact of climate, what we are seeing now in Sylhet or Sunamganj or in Mymensingh area. And if the climate is added to that mix, it means that we need a larger vision to deal with that issue. And Bangladesh being the lower riparian, we had to face the real brunt of the entire thing. And now, from our interest, we think that it's not the question of managing the 54 rivers. It's the managing the regional rivers on a basin-wise basis, or even, if possible, at a larger regional or inter-regional context. Otherwise, I think that we can talk about sharing of water issue, either of Tista or other 53, but I think it's a much larger issue, and we should look at that. And by the way, the water issue is becoming a sensitive issue already. We know about that. And Indo-Bangladesh relationship, one of the major irritants is the Tista issue. I'm not going to that. Now, the second issue that I should say is that what about the regional relationship? Is India looking at Bangladesh only from a bilateral frame? Sheikh Hasina's in India Plus or India Positive policy is essentially a component of the larger open regionalism. So what about the open regionalism concept? And when she talks about, or Bangladesh allows Bhutan to use its ports, allows Nepal to use its ports, is a part of the larger concept of open regionalism. How India and Bangladesh can find both of them into that kind of mix. So here I think that from Bangladesh perspective, we believe that Indo-Bangladesh relationship should also be aligned well with a larger regional progress, regional prosperity, regional potential. So from there, I think Bangladeshi expectation is there, and Zafar has rightly mentioned that we want to maintain our relationship with everybody. And we don't also want anybody to, or even India or any country, to just not restrict our opportunity. And our history is saying that what we try to do is maintain good relationship, and we have to do it for our own interest. Because Bangladesh, we know our challenges, and if we have to address them, effectively, we have to maintain relationship with all the countries, including India. And we understand the fact India is surrounding us on 3 fronts, and in fact 4 on all sides. India is our immediate neighbor. It can create a lot of security challenges for us. Although we have been able to resolve our security challenges, I should say, quite satisfactorily and working together for the last 10, 15 years' time. That's a very positive thing, and that has stabilized the situation. Also gave a huge dose of trust among our Indian friends that Bangladesh means business. So that's why we know that. And India is a rising power, economic power. So is Bangladesh a stupid country not to take that opportunity or tap on that opportunity? Definitely will do that. And we want India to make that opportunity for us, which should be mutually beneficial. We want that. It should be mutually beneficial. And if it is mutually beneficial, only then what High Commissioner you have mentioned about narrative. Narratives sometimes most of the time it comes out of the truth and reality and experience of human lives. So if human beings believe that, or people believe that in relationship with India is beneficial for us, definitely then we don't need to make an advertisement for that. People will automatically be working and seeking a better relationship with India. The last thing I should say, foreign policy is a part of domestic politics, domestic needs, priorities. Every country decides its foreign policy based on that. Now, what worries us? We talk about our liberation war and India's role in that. I was a freedom fighter. I was trained in Dehradun in India in 1971. So, India, the India that we saw then and India what we are seeing today, is the same India we are talking about? Or India is changing? I'm not going to add any value on that. But definitely India is changing. Bangladesh is also changing. But I would say, High Commissioner has mentioned that there is a consensus in India on Bangladesh. Let me also reverse that or put it in a different way. Now I think there is largely a consensus in Bangladesh that we have to live in peace with India. We have to benefit from our relationship with India. And Bangladesh should also leverage on its relationship with other neighbors, close or distant, to really move up the economic ladder. And Bangladesh, now we know that Bangladesh can achieve something unachievable or what we thought unachievable 20 years back. And I think that 20 years down the line, we'll be going faster and Bangladesh should really move at a much better speed. And on the regionalism issue, I should also say that look at what is happening around us. Our CEP is just on our in our neighborhood with Myanmar. India is joining with the IIPEF, Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Now, where are we? Where is Bangladesh? Or for that matter, other South Asian countries? So, and does it mean that we have not seen or didn't have any experience on regional cooperation or collaboration? We had. So, we have to think about the region as well. I mean, we are talking about SAARC, almost dead. Talking about BIMSTEC, I don't know what it is. BBIN, nowhere hard these days. So basically in South Asia, we are in a vacuum from a regional point of view. During the COVID, we used SAARC names, but it was a bilateral initiative. So SAARC is there. Why don't we use SAARC? I mean, this is a regional cooperative framework that can help us. And the globe, just as the global scenario is unfolding now, particularly after Ukraine scenario, it looks like that it's going into blocks. So if that happens, I mean, South Asia could be a very interesting place to look at afresh and then try to rebuild on what we had or we had tried earlier. And Bangladesh, I remember I was involved with the early phase of SAARC in the foreign ministry. So I can tell you that we still believe that it is possible. And let us not destroy or leave a potential that can benefit all all of us, and more particularly, I should say, it will benefit India, because India is asking or trying to get a seat at the global table, high table. And united SAARC or an active SAARC can be definitely be helpful with 8 votes at least for India. At this time, India doesn't have it. So if you want to be a power, Bangladesh could be helpful, and we can help you to regenerate SAARC, as because we have the idea country, and we can do that. Nepal would be very happy to do that. So many countries will be supportive, and then if there is a problem with one country, why are we just wasting our time? Or I should say that why we are thinking that that country is more powerful than others. We can leverage our strength and then try to revive that. So I believe that there are opportunities, and from a Bangladeshi perspective, we want our excellent relationship with India, profitable relationship based on mutual interest, and on the basis of interdependence, recognition of interdependence. We need both. We need each other both, and we have to understand that. So that's one thing. And the last thing I should say that regional. If we look at the regions, see what is happening in Sri Lanka, what is happening in potentially may happen in Maldives, problem in Pakistan, and now in Nepal, little bit of soundings are there. So we are seeing that the whole region is in a kind of uncertain environment. Who is the leader here? Who can take care of that? So, I think Bangladesh-India relationship, we are okay, we are fine. So we can take the leadership if we join together. So I think that India-Bangladesh relationship, let us not focus only on the bilateral frame. Look at it from a larger frame and then set their bilateral into the larger frame that would benefit India, Bangladesh, and the whole region. When the region is safe, peaceful, prosperous, all the boats will rise, we all will be benefited. Thank you very much.
Could we just move over to, I was just going to say, thank you so much. That was very eloquently done. And I imagine that His Excellency would like to respond, but if we could just bring in our third panelist, and then after that, I'll give you an opportunity. How does that sound? Yeah? Okay. Aishapa?
Good afternoon, Your Excellency, Vikram Doraiswamy, Commodore Absar, Ambassador Humayun Kabir, and Zafar Soban, ladies and gentlemen, ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen present here today. So I'm really happy to speak here from the viewpoint of media. So I won't go into too much complexities, because as a media person, I want to bring out certain points and issues which Zafar Soban has already brought to a certain extent. But this is a huge opportunity, I think, to speak about India-Bangla relations, because of many reasons. These relations are very different from relations between two countries anywhere else in the world, from many perspectives, these bilateral relations. There's the history we have, the sheer geographical proximity, our cultural ties, social ties, business ties. There's no end to the linkages that we have. So as a journalist, speaking from the angle of the media, I'd like to say that it's very important, because media is a sort of conduit between two nations, and on a people-to-people level too, it has a very vital role to play. So whether we are within our own country or, any country in the world, not just India or Bangladesh, media can be very loved, or can be very hated, more likely hated in many cases, depending on what we are writing about, depending on what we are telecasting, what we are airing. But coming to the issue of Bangladesh and India relations, I just want to say that the media on both sides of the border has an extremely responsible role to play. When two countries are so close in so many ways, and there's so many sensitive issues involved which emerge, any countries which are so close as Bangladesh and India, it's only natural that very sensitive issues will emerge. And so these call for very sensitive, responsible treatment through verification, objectivity, anything that professional media calls for. But that doesn't mean the media has to always just paint a very rosy picture to, maintain the peace and, just saying all good things, catering to the official narrative all the time on either side, whether it's Bangladesh or India. I mean, painting a good narrative is the job of the diplomats. But I feel even today, diplomats, especially I must say over here, His Excellency Vikram Doraiswamy, are not so inclined as before just to sweet coat any bitter pill that may come back. I think everyone is being a bit more realistic and pragmatic, because that's the only way forward. And so the media too has to be pragmatic and realistic without being aggressive for the sake of being aggressive. So my point here is that we'll definitely speak out and highlight all that is good. It's not that we'll just, bring up all the bad points. We will speak out of good. That's important, because that's also a part of reality. And there's so much good to write about, right from our historical ties in 1971, when India lent us their full support in the liberation war, sheltering our refugees, sacrificing so many of lives of their people, and then even now think of how our patients going to India, our students going to India, our tourists going to India, our shoppers going to India. So all of that is there, and nothing, and extremely significant. And on our side also, think of our contribution to India too, especially when we think of the Northeast insurgents, not allowing them to, set up camp here, or if they had, driving them out, which was a really daunting task, I think, not allowing any insurgents here to operate from Bangladesh. And we all know what a dangerous and daunting task that was, but Bangladesh did it, and I think it's made a huge difference to India. India does acknowledge it, about the security in the Northwest. So, it's a two-way friendship that we have. So there's good on both ends. But what about the irritants? It's all easy to speak about the good things, and it's easy to speak about the irritants too. So is it the duty of good neighbors, and I include the media here too, just to turn a blind eye, sweep all the trouble points under the rug? Surely not. I feel if we do bring up these bones of contention, and I was really happy to see right from the beginning, whether it was Zafar Soban or even His Excellency himself and the rest of the speakers, everyone has brought up the irritants and has dealt with them, hasn't turned a blind eye. So I think if we do, especially I'm talking about the media now, when we say if we bring up points of these irritants or bones of contention in the media, I don't think we should be labeled as anti-Indian media, anti-Indian press. In the same way in India, when they speak about Bangladesh or anything which they perceive to be negative about Bangladesh, not necessarily are they anti-Bangladesh, because we even speak about against issues within our own country. That doesn't mean we are anti-Bangladesh. We're just sort of telling it like it is. So bringing up certain issues doesn't magnify the problems, but it actually gives the other chance to explain, to verify, or work out a solution. Again, let me talk about Excellency Vikram Doraiswamy here, because whenever I've had the opportunity with my colleagues to interview him, and we have brought up issues, contentious issues, he's never shirked away from them. I have to thank you that he's used this opportunity to explain, to give his view, to give his narrative, and also to even admit certain irritants or certain problems that are there. And I think that's the way it should be, and that's how media and the rest of, whether it's the government or the non-government sectors, there should be that openness, that flow. So when we turn to the irritants, the many too, I think it's already all been mentioned here, the Tista water, the border killing, or India's failure to support, or we see it as India's failure to support us in the Rohingya issue, about the Rohingya repatriation issue, to stand up for us in the international media in this particular issue of the repatriation of the Rohingyas. So when the media writes about these, I don't think we're being anti-Indian, but rather just seeking redress to problems. If we don't look after our national interests, who will? And it's not just national interests, it's just people's interests, I would say. So as a media person, I'd like to say that the media too needs to be, because of regional, bilateral, global, the situation needs to be extremely educated, informed, and accurate media, especially given the world's situation nowadays. Bangladesh media, yes, I'm not saying that we are perfect. We do have irresponsible yellow journalism, just like any other country of the world. That even a very respected Indian newspaper I was reading, I think it was the Indian Times, it was over there, there's written the headlines that Bangladesh High Court postpones hearing in tax evasion case against pro-Pakistani politician Dr. Kamal Hussain. Now, Dr. Kamal Hussain is the author of our constitution. He was 9 months incarcerated in Pakistan during the liberation war, and yet this major Indian media called him pro-Pakistan. So the media needs to be educated, and I'm not meaning just the Indian media, our side too. So before we bring up contentious issues, let us be educated, let us be informed, let us verify each and every point that we make, especially when relations between the two countries are so sensitive. And you are so right about the media, and that's why I think media has a very important role, especially in this day and age of social media, because social media is so full of, I won't hesitate to say, trash, that people need to turn to the mainstream media to verify things. So that's where we've become we have to be all the more responsible as the media. Again, especially I'm referring to our relations with India. And I mean, it's all right to be nationalist, patriotic, those are all very good, and we all should be. But there's something which is arising now, jingoism, ultranationalism, which can be very opposite of constructive, very destructive. So, also about one point you mentioned, Excellency Doraiswamy, about movies not being showed here. Yeah, that's very unfortunate, and people watch the movies anyway, Indian movies. Showing them in cinema halls would benefit our cinema theatres too. At the same time, there was a time when Bangladesh's television plays, programs, magazine programs were extremely popular in West Bengal, the Bengali speaking, more popular perhaps than some of the West Bengal plays and all at that time, but we've been never allowed to air our channels, not being allowed to show it over there, and that's been a bone of contention. So I think these things can be worked out. These are nothing that can't be worked out. These can be worked out. So I just want to say that, as a media person, that we bring up lots of issues which might not be pleasant, which might not be appreciated, but as a journalist, I'd like to say, don't shoot the messenger. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ashapa. Now, we were going to go straight to questions from the audience, but I think before we do that, why don't we bring in the High Commissioner again, because I think specifically a lot of what has been mentioned by the other panelists is something which you may actually would like to respond to. So why don't we do that for a few minutes, and then we'll bring in the larger audience.
So let me be brief. I think the reason why I wanted to respond is because a lot of this will also come back from the floor. So let me try and address this. So if you have further comebacks, that would then be at least a more productive conversation. And besides, I think I'll run out of notes then if I have to wait for everybody to ask their questions. Let me begin with Aisha Ji's point. I think she's absolutely right. The point is about ensuring that our discourse is educated, responsible, and accurate. I think those are very important words. And so let me try and make this discourse at least accurate. I don't know about the educated part. My education was only sort of halfway full. So there is, as I've been trying to suggest, a lot of the narrative is based on shall we just say, old talking points that may have existed about 25 years ago, but are fundamentally not true. Let me say it in categoric terms that these are fundamentally not true. The first, let me start with the points about trade, since those were raised. Folks talk about non-tariff barriers. I am yet to actually see a list of non-tariff barriers that we have imposed. We have duty-free, quota-free access to almost all Bangladeshi products in excess of 98% of your tariff lines for the last 11 years, right? Now, the point simply here is the reason why trade isn't working as well as it should in your favor is because the cost of doing business from Bangladesh to India is too high. It is cheaper and faster for you and for me to ship goods to Germany than to each other. Now, if that is the kind of cost that's going to be applied on your trade, it is not possible for you to sell. There is just no reason in the world that we would apply political considerations and not buy goods from Bangladesh when you just have to look at our trade. There are a number of countries with whom our relationship is fraught, where we have far more imports. So this just doesn't stand to any kind of scrutiny, right? So let me say that upfront. The reason for your exports not being adequate is because of the cost of logistics. Now, business people, when I've gone to the borders, have asked me, why can't you improve the borders at, say, places like Burimari, Changrabanda? I've been to almost all the border crossings, all right? And I accept the border crossings are in ghastly condition, right? All across both sides. Now, why is that? Well, if I can't export my goods to you through 99% of the border, why would I spend my taxpayers' money improving that border? It's very simple. I'm only allowed to export all my land-based exports through Petropol. That creates its own negative rent-seeking economy in terms of, let me say it in so many words, mafias who operate on parking, who operate on unloading, loading on both sides. I'm not beating up on anybody. The mafias are equally strong on our side too. Now, why is that? If 99% of my road-based trade goes through Petropol, it is a recipe for a problem. You don't have to be an economist to know this, right? Now, on the subject of non-tariff barriers, I would argue that the biggest non-tariff barrier we have is the restrictions to the movement of goods. If you were to actually have a motor vehicles agreement protocol on cargo approved, which we have been trying to do since 2015 when the thing was signed, the motor vehicles agreement was signed, we would today be able to have your goods come all the way up to Delhi or Bombay or wherever by truck or by train, and we would be able to have our goods go all the way up to Dhaka or Narayanganj or Chittagong or wherever by truck, but they can't. They have to come and be unloaded. That adds another 15 to 20% of cost. All of these things are pass-throughs, right? So if the cost of trade is that much, it is going to pass through and go directly to the consumer. Who is going to buy anything that costs more than an equivalent product from some other country? Consumers buy on the basis of their wallets, not on the basis of where the made-in label says, right? On the subject of countervailing duty on jute, there is no countervailing duty on jute. There was anti-dumping duty on jute products. There is a difference. Anti-dumping duty is company-specific. Countervailing duty is country-specific. Now, countervailing duty was not imposed specifically at the request of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina because, frankly speaking, it would have unnecessarily added to the irritation on your side if countervailing duty was imposed. But let us also be clear about this. We are offering you zero duty-free, quota-free access for jute products into India, among other products. If you apply an export incentive of 8% on it, how does that help? How is that fair? My jute exporters then have to deal with something that is incentivized to the point of 8%. If there was no incentive for exports going into India on the same product, it would at least be a fair market, right? You can certainly incentivize exports to other countries that are further away, and it makes sense for you to do that. But when you have a duty-free, quota-free opportunity to export to us, it seems a little unfair that you would also apply export incentives on top of that on this particular product. On food products, for instance, we have offered for the last 2 years, and at least since I've been here, an arrangement which we have only offered to Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Nepal for your goods and our goods, food product goods, to go through on the basis of mutual recognition of each other's labs, which means certification. I certify your labs, you certify my labs, and thereafter my food safety approval is adequate for my goods coming in, and your safety approval is good for your goods coming in. That agreement is still pending for the last 2 years. We're ready to do this. We haven't offered this to any of our major partners, not to the US, not to Australia, not to Japan, not to China, nobody else. Now, these are things that we could do. This is very much in your opportunity. And those businesses who have despaired of waiting for this to happen have gone ahead and set up businesses in India, like Pran, for instance. They're exporting products that are hugely popular and causing a number of people, I'm sure, to put on weight, like the potato biscuits, which are absolutely brilliant, fruit juices, etc. Absolutely great stuff. Why would we not want to buy it? Even the television programs that you mentioned, Aisha ji, there is no regulatory reason why that is not possible. We have an arrangement between Bangladesh TV and Doordarshan to show these programming for free on each other's free-to-air channels. The only restriction is that it has to go through the set-top operator, which is a commercial point. So the reason that it hasn't actually gone through is because, quite frankly, it's an expensive business in India. Your media companies have asked us to make it a discount. Now, Government of India can't give you a discount on set-top operators in Calcutta or Delhi or whatever. This is something that has to be negotiated bilaterally. But there is no restriction. After all, till fairly recently, you could get Pakistani TV channels in India. There's no reason why we would have Pakistani TV channels or Chinese TV channels or TV channels from UAE or Qatar or wherever, and not have Bangladeshi TV channels. Why would we not want it? There is, again, as I'm saying, there is no earthly reason to believe in conspiracies. The more prosaic reasons usually are true. Now, we talked about, sorry, I'm getting into detail, but I thought it makes sense to answer these things in detail. Thereafter, please feel free to ask me specific questions on top of that. On the border, I have addressed this issue repeatedly in public media, including with the outstanding interview people from Protomalo, one of whom is sitting right here. The border issue is, you are absolutely correct, Ambassador, the border issue is a problem because our people used to live in an integrated economic community, which has been separated by a border that has run through villages, communities, fields, etc. So obviously these are people who've been disadvantaged. And this is a collective fault on both sides that we've done nothing to ensure their economic upliftment. But the two things that are happening are being confused. One, illegal movement across the border, which is people going across for a variety of reasons, sometimes quite as innocently as one unfortunate young man who wanted to go and watch an IPL game. He, well, why not? It's close by. He thought he'd go and watch an IPL game. He got caught, but he was sent back. And illicit economic activity, which people know is illicit, which comes with violence with it. So these are two very separate things, and in the public domain, these are being confused. So let me address this upfront. No one is shooting people who are crossing illegally. If you look at the statistics, over 600 people were returned on the basis of mutual understandings between the BSF and the BGB, where people are, when they're caught illegally crossing, going under the culverts, and it's both ways. I'm not saying it's only Bangladeshis going to India. There are people also from India coming to Bangladesh to see relatives, to shop, to do, ordinary things. These folks are handed over to the other side. If the other side is able to verify that this person or that person is from the village that they say they are just accepted. This is not even publicized very much. Now we've started getting BSF to publicize it. So any of you who follow BSF on Twitter or Facebook, you'll see we're now getting this publicized. So that people actually know that people are being released perfectly unharmed to each other's border guarding forces. Where does the violence happen then? Well, if you look at the cases that are reported of deaths on the border, these are people who are crossing or carrying out, shall we say, economic activities of a certain nature between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m., not exactly business hours. They are on both sides of the border. They cut open border fences. They are either smuggling drugs or fencidril or cattle, right? Now, everybody tells me that there is no demand for cattle. There's adequate meat production here, and I accept that. This is not coming into the formal market. But there is no market for cattle in India as a meat product for cultural reasons. And so if you're getting cattle for pretty much for free, then it is of some economic value locally. And that's the reason why this is happening. And look, I've actually seen videos of what is happening over there. You get 20 to 30 young men, all armed. They're on both sides of the border. So, and it's you can only see it with UV camera, IR camera, infrared camera. You can see what's happening. The border patrolling guys, our guys are deployed in basically almost 4 times the number, which is why the incidents are more on our side, are usually 4 men to a patrol. There are about 20 young men, armed usually, who attack them to push through the goods that they're trying to smuggle. Now, at such a point of time, any border force is entitled to the right to self-defense, and I'm sorry to say, but BGB does that too. BGB also exercises the right to self-defense, including on the Teknaf border. Please see your own statistics and your own reports. I am not for a moment saying that this is a random shooting of people. The number of people being shot, tragically, is almost the same in terms of nationality. Look, in any room, to us, we look the same. How do you think at 3 in the morning anybody's going to be able to tell the difference between a Bangladeshi and an Indian, right? People look exactly the same on the border. We look exactly the same. There is very little to be able to tell the difference, right? So it is just not true. Now, should it happen? Certainly not. I am not for a moment saying this is fine and we should shrug our shoulders and say it's okay. But this is something that needs to be addressed fundamentally. We need to be able to take people away from the border, away from these activities, and it needs a joint effort on both sides. It can't be done by just saying you stop shooting people. To that, the BSF's answer is, well, you get them to stop coming and hitting us with clubs and sticks, because for every 10 people who've been shot or injured with firing, there are almost 10 times the number of BSF guys who've been maimed. You know, guys have lost hands, guys have lost arms. Now, these are also, somebody has to be answerable for what happens to them. I mean, how do we as government explain to our people that it's okay for you to get maimed? You know, we can't say that. Now, on the Teesta issue, the position is repeatedly stated by the government of India, both the Congress government and the BJP government, that we are ready to move with the treaty. But you have to understand that the constitutional limits of power in India are such that states do have a certain say about how water is done. I mean, there is a reason why the oldest court dispute about water is between Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, my part of the world, and it's over a river. River water is a sensitive subject even in our states, and unfortunately we do have to bring on board the state concerned. We are more than ready to move ahead on the Teesta and on other rivers. So, you know, we've had 2 rounds of the secretarial JRC. We have hopefully some good news which will come through when the Prime Minister comes, but it can't just be the Teesta. We have 54 rivers that we have to work on, and we are willing to work on all the others also. Regionalism, my last point, I know I've taken a long time in responding. Regionalism. Now, thank you, Ambassador. I completely agree with you. We certainly do want regionalism. As I've been trying to say, since 1976, Bangladesh and Nepal have been able to move goods across Indian territory using railways. And it's been happening. Because it's been happening so routinely, nobody writes about it, right? Since 2011, we have bilateral power export opportunities, and since 2018, we have cross-border electricity guidelines in place that will allow a sort of a sub-regional grid to come up for Nepal as and when it has adequate surplus power through the year to export not just to us, but also to you, or to anybody else, or to import as the case may be. Now, this will require connectivity. People ask me, why can't we buy power from Nepal? Sure, you can, but you need connectivity. The existing connectivity, which is through India, is already fully booked. There is 1,000 megawatts that is going through asynchronous connection. That is fully booked. Additional connectivity that will come will have to be synchronous connections, because we can't keep building asynchronous lines across the region. It costs a lot of money and it requires pooling arrangements. Sorry, I don't know if I'm now getting too technical, but the short point is we are more than willing to invest in this, and we have been pursuing the idea of synchronous grid connectivity between our two countries through a dedicated line that will connect up the mountains with the plains of India through Bangladesh, allowing you the opportunity of importing much more power, including hydroelectric power, from the mountain countries. That just needs to be done. We are more than ready to move ahead. And that will be as an investment. We're not asking for Bangladesh to put money in. Regionalism also applies in the terms of movement of goods and services. We're very keen, and Bangladesh today is also equally keen on moving forward on the motor vehicles agreement in terms of bus travel for passengers and car travel, and also for freight. We need to bring the other two countries on board. Bhutan has already said that it will, sit back and let the rest of us go forward. But we do need at least Nepal to come on board. If Nepal also is not interested, we're ready to move forward bilaterally also. For us, it's not a problem allowing your trucks or our trucks to move across the border, but we have to have an arrangement in place for it. Whose insurance applies, what regulations will apply, what documentation will be. These are technicalities that we have to sort out. What else on regionalism? SAARC, well, don't tell us about SAARC. There is one country that has vetoed everything that we wanted to do in SAARC, including connectivity. Tell them. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, if you get SAARC working, great. But it needs all the other countries to also want to be on board, not just you and me, as you correctly said. Last point about the emerging consensus in Bangladesh about good relations with India. Well, I'll take your word for it, Ambassador. I'm waiting to see that completely emerge. Thank you.
Of preemptive answers in there, strikes in there, but I think we have a little bit of time, so let's throw it out to the audience. Let's see. Ambassador, why don't you start with you?
Sorry, lady. Age benefit. I think talk is that it has been an heart talk and very raise the critical issues, and you want to, as Aisha Kabir said, you sweep them under the carpet. That's not a friendship. That's not a good relationship. Having said that, there has been a litany of questions, and the very consummate, and he's a very good ambassador. And when he came before his arrival, I read an article about him in Indian media. He was, termed as the wolf diplomat. So I don't know, but he has been. I find him, much more amiable, much more friendship. I didn't see his the teeth. Anyway, I and our friend Humayun Kabir, as he had said, we have been freedom fighters, and we were trained in India. From a student, I was turned into an officer in India by the Indian officers. And I remember, very vividly, the kind of enormous help that India extended to us for 9 long months. Giving shelter, food, security to 10 million people, beside helping us to fight the Pakistanis occupying Pakistanis before the final launch. Now, let me take you back. I don't know, many people are here, that older generations like me and Humayun will remember that since 1947, after the partition, we in East Pakistan, especially the Bengalis, used to look upon across the border to India. Everything that happened in India, we used to cite an example. And here, Zafar Sobhan is here, and his great uncle, I would say, Prime Minister Sarwardi. Every now and then he used to quote, what is happening in Indian Supreme Court, Indian democracy, and he used to tell, used to admonish our judges in those days that don't put yourself into shame. Look what is happening in India. That has been that kind of elements of relationship between our two lands. Now, until 1971, there has been number of wars between India and Pakistan. None of them were fought in East Pakistan. The East Pakistanis, we did not ever feel threatened from security perspective from India, although we had lived. In 1965 war, there was not a single fire shot in East Pakistan from either way, either side. But what the fallout from that war had a tremendous adverse impact on our economy. I come from a rural part of Bangladesh that's in the north. In my rural area, which is called Chilmari, which is famous otherwise, we had more than 24 of Indian businessmen, big businessmen, Marwari. And they really were the mainstay of our economy. They were the engine of our economy. So this, after the 1965 war, they left, and that had a tremendous adverse, effect on our local economy. Now, after 71, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, when he returned home from long incarceration in Pakistan, the first thing, before coming to his land, before coming to his people, he went to New Delhi. That was what? It was an expression of the gratitude. It was to lay the foundation of relationship, friendship between our two countries. Bangladesh-India friendship is sacrosanct. There's absolutely nothing can change that. It is like our geography. The friendship, strengthening relationship with India is Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's article of faith. It's an article of faith for her. But having said that, now, Zafar has said he has really raised certain very critical points. I'd like to bring an analogy. When you sow seed in a fertile land, it yields crops. But if you sow seed in an unfertile land, in dry land, you only waste the seeds, it doesn't give. You said, Ambassador, High Commissioner, to ignore the social media. I think with respectfully, I would not agree with you. Why? Because right or wrong, social media that brings the perspective, sentiment of the people, whether you may not like it, but that is something from, as they said in the military terms, tactics, only you can do things, take your side, you can take your strength, only if you know the strength of your enemy. If you know what your enemy is thinking, only then you can take necessary action. And in this case, even if you take them as your enemy, you know what the enemies are thinking. So you have to change that, how you can change that enemy's thinking. We have perfect relationship at the government level. And I can, our Chittagong Hill Tracts insurgency, the Padma, there are so many, and you have identified, these are very good things. These agreements have come, these are very good. But how much have they percolated down to the normal people? What does the people think? There is something called reality, and there is something called perspective. At the end of the day, the perspective holds. If that whatever the relationship we have with India, fantastic, very good, absolutely no doubt about it. But how much of that benefit percolate down to the people, that the people say, like Humayun said, yes, I am benefited. That is something that it is a challenging task, that to involve the people, to have the people on board. With regard to the regionalism, I think India has abandoned its responsibility, its leadership, like Humayun said. There is something called the flying goose. When the goose fly together, there is one leader, that all other goose, they follow it. India, in this region, I think that's the leader goose. And I think that rightly, with Humayun, that India has abandoned that responsibility, that honor. And that's why today we do not see all the countries eye to eye, and there is no regionalism in this region. Third, give me 2 minutes. I'll tell you as far as I'll just make comments. So we have talked about public opinion. Yes. Now, you see, sometimes we say that internal issues, Yes, there are certain things, internal issues, but they do make impact across the border. In a inner sea, yes, these are the domestic issues, but the way they have crafted, the way they have strategized, the people across the border in this area, they feel it hurts their sentiment. They are not directly impacted, but it hurts their sentiment. It hurts their psyche. How can you help it? And they will come out against it. But today, the social, development that's taking place in India, including the insult to the Prophet Muhammad, you just can't say that this is an internal issue. This has affected not only this country, the whole Muslim world. I don't know how come this stupid kind of comments is tolerated. How and why they would make a responsible person, a responsible Indian, would make such a comment knowing fully well that this is not going to remain confined within this border or within this group, and it will catch fire like a wildfire, and that's what exactly has happened. And I'm sure, High Commissioner, you know that how much damage, the PR damage it has done to India. This small, stupid comment by some non-entity, but it has made an impact. The third thing, yes, our economy, our travel, you have done good thing, but. You have done very good thing, after you came about the visa. You have enhanced, you have increased the visa centers. These are good things, and I know I really do appreciate. I'm not trying to criticize you, and I'm not going to condemn. What I'm just trying to highlight that how we can. What are the these areas that we need to concentrate. These are the areas that we need to consider. Business, normal relationship, it has their own dynamics, and they will move with their own dynamics. If Bangladesh can create a conducive condition, the Indian businessman will come. Business is all about money and profit. It's not about charity. It's not a charity. This is all about profit. You create the condition, and they will come. So that's, I don't, So thank you very much. I don't want to take, thank you very much.
Thank you,
but
Ambassador.
before I conclude, I would like to say that I am a strong believer of India-Bangladesh relationship, and I hope and pray that it will continue to grow strength to strength. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. So, who's next? Okay, Namia and then Shahab afterwards. Please introduce yourself, and could we keep it with questions rather than comments, because we're running out of time a little, and then afterwards Mejabin and Faiz. So, next 4 speakers have been set.
Thank you very much, distinguished panelists. I'm Nami Akhtar, Policy Advisor at the Embassy of the Netherlands. So I will keep my questions short as requested. So the Kingdom of the Netherlands works on transboundary water management, both with the government of India and also with the government of Bangladesh. And bearing in mind that the UN Water Conference is coming ahead in 2023, how does India and Bangladesh view the role of the Netherlands in collaborating with these countries for effective transboundary water management? And my next question is, taking into consideration that Bangladesh is expected to graduate from the LDC category in 2026, how does India perceive its relation with Bangladesh to change, keeping this context in mind? So thank you very much.
More questions, and then we'll answer all at once. So Shahab, and then Mejabin, and then Faiz.
Thank you.
And please introduce yourself for everyone.
I'm Professor Shahab, and I teach international relations. High Commissioner, thank you very much for your absolutely outstanding deliberation, and I think it was needed. And of course, Ambassador Kabir and Ashapa for their absolutely outstanding deliberation too. 2 important things. I mean, I did my PhD sitting in Delhi. And the main purpose of my PhD was to understand Indian discourse on Bangladesh, because I understand Bangladesh discourse on India. So even my understanding of discourse is pretty much linking the every sector that creates a human society. I took energy as one of the key component for my PhD, linking it with national security. Now, why did I take national security here? Just to understand the absolute market mechanism, which Ambassador High Commissioner has rightly mentioned, that it's all about competition, it's all about capacity, it's all about market, how market is going to do the pricing. Where does the national security comes in within the energy sector? The very simple reason is, once again, the politics. Now, the purpose of that PhD dissertation was to really show that unless we don't get habit of securitizing everything, we are not going to go anywhere, even in the market sector, right? And that's exactly where the High Commissioner has pointed out. That's exactly where Ambassador Kabir has highlighted. And I believe that we have to really desecuritize the whole narratives through which we see Bangladesh and India, starting from the border, starting from water, everything comes within the paranoia of security. Now, that's something we have to work on. High Commissioner and myself had the pleasure of attending one of the conferences very recently by Aspen Institute and Center for Policy Dialogue. And we both have seen the richness of the changes that has taken place between these two countries. I mean, look at the market issues. India is working on their side of the border. We are working on our side of the border. The problem lies is in the mutual capacity. That's exactly where we have to work on. Whether it is in the field of bureaucracy, whether it is in the political understanding, or perhaps even if it is the social understanding. Even as the think tanks are now talking. And look at the High Commissioner being Indian High Commissioner sitting in an open platform, having an open discussion, rather than just having a myopic understanding of what's going on. And I believe this should continue, and this is exactly where last time and the CPD posed this proposal to everyone, that how do we strengthen the confidence building mechanism? Forget about social media, forget about, I mean, algorithm can change many things. That can change even the electoral results anywhere. So forget about that part of the story right now. Let's focus on how do we actually translate the politics of our understanding into a mutual benefit. So there is the issue of discourse. Correcting the discourse is very much needed. The second important point is, I believe, is the national interest. I mean, Aisha has rightly mentioned, India will always pursue its national interest. We will pursue our national interest, and our national interest is absolutely focused on one issue, which is market and economic development. Now, market creation cannot happen just by us or by the Indians themselves. It has to be a mutual process. This is exactly where we have to really focus and refocus on the regional institution buildings, because we need a regional harmonization. Can we really do trade with Thailand? Can we do trade with Myanmar if we don't have the regional countries to come? So for Bangladesh, there's no either or. For Bangladesh, there is absolutely one priority: who serves the best for the market. And even if you look, on the 25th, we are going to inaugurate the Padma Bridge. That will pave a way not for the southern side of Bangladesh, but for the Indians, but for the Burmese, but for the Thailand, and of course for the Bay of Bengal overall. So how do we tap in? So that's something we should be discussing in the coming months. And probably High Commissioner, yourself, and CFISS, and of course our institution, Bangladesh Enterprise Institution, can take that particular narrative forward. And the last point, I believe, which has been largely missing over here, is the essential understanding of media. Now, Ambassador is right when he said that under SARC framework, and even in the bilateral framework, there's no barrier for Bangladeshi TV channels to be seen in India. The problem lies is with the cable wala, because this is exactly Bangladesh Enterprise Institute studied formally back in 2006, 7, and 8. And that's exactly what came out. Because now, whenever NTV goes to Calcutta and says that, okay, City Cable, can you put me on the top 10? The price comes so high that NTV cannot do that. Now, yeah, that's the part of the story. But the second part of the story, probably that we should do in future, that how do we create a new market over here? That's something we need to study. That's something we need to carry forward. And another point, last point, Zafar Bhai, please bear with me. And this is an opportunity for me to corrupt a High Commissioner's mind for a while. So the whole idea over here is look at the energy crisis. Energy. This is top priority. India cannot move on without energy. We cannot. Neither Nepal and Bhutan. And we will always be having the boo-boo and zuzu of China and extra-regionals to come in until or unless we really come up with a meaningful framework for cooperation. Of course, 50 megawatt has been proposed that will be coming through the underground, I guess, the transmission line from Nepal, which is now being discussed. And if that is happening, that will pave a way for fantastic cooperation. And that's where we should be looking forward, how better we can do it for Bhutan, we can do it for Northeast India, we can do similarly for Myanmar. And that's probably the reason why the foreign minister or the foreign ministry was essentially looking forward to Indian participation in our dialogues with the Burmese. And that's where I think there should not be any compromise when it comes to absolutely synchronizing our national interests. And national interests can only be done or delivered if we can understand what's happening in Ukraine. And look at all these South Asian countries follow the same suit when it comes to the resolution. That tells you a new geopolitical reality as well as the economic reality. So therefore, we are now much more of a confident nations, both Bangladesh and India. And India's stability is of paramount interest for Bangladesh, and Bangladesh's interest lies in its own stability. And therefore, I think greater cooperation through the market mechanism should be the priority and should only be the priority. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shahab.
Hello. Yes, thank you. I'm Majubin Khalid, former member of parliament. As a politician, I just want one question, which I see. I am not a specialist, so what comes to my mind? It's the young generation. There's so much anti-Indian sentiment right now. So I just want to know that how come it came to this stage? Why young people are thinking so much against the Indians? So what can we do about it? And I think our panelists, they gave a wonderful presentation, but they have touched all the issues. But with the young generation, we need to think, because they're the future leaders. In 10 years, they'll be the leaders. So if there are so much anti-Indian sentiment with them, so how do we change them? How come we have forgotten about 1971? Though the ambassador said things are changing, the politics has changed, but what can we do about it? Thank you.
Yes.
I'm Faiz Soban, Senior Research Director at Bangladesh Enterprise Institute. Thank you to all the speakers for their very illuminating remarks. I want to make a brief comment and maybe one or two questions for the High Commissioner. Just picking up on the last point made by Ms. Majubin Khalid, I think it is deeply worrying and of great concern to Bangladeshis when they see that Muslims across the border are under attack. And the issue of social media has been mentioned a few times. Yes, I myself am a sort of observer of what happens on the social media platforms, and it is very disturbing. Whether you're seeing videos of Muslims being beaten, or something related to a beef lynching, and often it's based on just spurious rumors. There's no sort of truth to that matter, and of course these things go viral, as we know, and a lot of hateful remarks are made. So that's I think one issue. Again, my question for the High Commissioner is what can we do to assuage fears here at home, because obviously domestically, it does have an impact. And as Ambassador Dawla mentioned, these may be cited as internal issues, whether it's CAA, NRC, the fact that senior politicians in India use remarks like termites and throwing Bangladeshis into the sea and so on. So these obviously do cause a lot of resentment and anger. because we do view our relationship with India as a very special one. And there's undoubtedly been leaps and bounds of progress in the last 13 odd years. I've been a close observer of BD India ties, having participated in 8 BD India dialogues at the track 1.5 level. And nothing was, if you like, off the table, whether it was maritime security, border smuggling, terrorism, counterterrorism cooperation, and other, contentious issues. So while we've made a lot of progress, and I think perception obviously is, highly important, especially in our relationship, because if you go back to 2009-10, the issue of security loomed large for India, and I think Bangladesh, especially the initiative led by the Prime Minister Hasina herself, on delivering on security wholeheartedly was greatly appreciated by the Indian leadership, and Prime Minister Manmohan Singh said so publicly a few times. So likewise, we view through the prism, the Bangladesh views water as an imperative or as a major issue in terms of its relationship with India. And of course, that issue is still being discussed, i.e. the issue of Tista looms large. But let me now, fast forward to the current realities. So 13 years on, great progress, economic cooperation, energy cooperation, people to people. I think it's truly extraordinary the number of visitors from Bangladesh who go across to India for everything from, studying to tourism to getting medical treatment. Zafar and I both studied in India, and we have very happy memories of that. But I think it does trouble us when we see what happens, domestically in India. And also, my final question would be to the High Commissioner: what are, if you had to pick out 3 issues where Bangladesh, India could really capitalize on? Be it challenges, be it positives, what would those 3 issues be? And finally, on the issue of regionalism or regional cooperation, what are the prospects of resuscitating SAARC? India played such a pivotal role in the genesis of SAARC, going back 40 odd years. And the issue of IPF, or the Indo-Pacific Security, or rather IPEF, the economic framework which the US recently launched. Do you see Bangladesh as an important part of that process? Should we come on board? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm afraid we're going to have to make that the last question/comment because we are running out of time. And what I would suggest we do is, I think Mejabin's question is something which could perhaps be directed and answered both by Aisha and Humayun Bhai. And why don't you make your answer to that question double, is a sort of a closing statement, and then we'll move to Vikram, because I think most of the other questions, the ones you choose to be able to respond to, were directed at you, and that could also, as you said, double is your closing statement. So why don't we work with that? Aisha, you want to go first? I think Mejabin Appa's point was, why is it that right now that among the youth, and I think that's a very salient question, that there is this antipathy, and what can we do about that? And then Humayun, if you could also address that, and any of the other questions which you think you have input which would be valuable, that would be great.
Okay. Yeah, that's a very salient question which Mejabin put up. And I think the best way to address this issue about the youth, which is undeniable, we do see a huge wave of anti-Indian sentiment among the youth, is where do we see that mostly? I mean, we see it all over, and a big source of this is on social media. And social media is something we can't ignore. It's something that's very... it's out there, and it does reflect the sentiment of the people. So what is needed on both sides of the border, I think, is actually to take this seriously, study it. Some of it naturally is very politically motivated, but a lot of it isn't politically motivated. So what are the bones of contention, the irritants, the reasons behind the sentiment, this hatred or this anti-Indian feelings? So we have to go to the root cause, because I'm sure this is not just unsubstantiated. It might be wrongly put, it might be wrongly substantiated, but if we go to the root cause, see why whether it's because of certain issues which FISS pointed out, those issues are over there, and other issues, both sides, the authorities need to actually identify the issues and address those particular issues. Of course, as a media person, we have a responsibility to make sure that the correct narrative is out there. If these youth are being misled by wrong narratives, to give a counter narrative, that's the media's responsibility. But more than the media's responsibility, it's the authorities on both sides to actually address the issues so that these sentiments aren't generated or these people are not getting any misconceptions. And I think that's the thing, addressing the root cause.
Thanks very much, Asha. Humayun Bhai, if you would address that, as I said, / closing statement, because we are running out of time.
Okay, thank you very much. I think stimulating set of questions, comments. A few observations I have. One is about Ambassador Doraiswamy Vikram. He's an outstanding diplomat, and he has, I should say, vigorously defended the Indian position, and he has done his job wonderfully, I should say. Come on, congratulations, High Commissioner. That's your job. That's what a professional should do. But I think, as I said in my comments, that it is expanding horizontally. A lot of areas have come into picture during the last 10, 12 years. So it's good. I welcome that. Although that kind of progress. But now my question is, and it will remain so until I see some substantive progress, depth issue. And on that depth issue, let me link it to the issue that Zafar has mentioned or Mezabin has raised. I have a kind of hobby of moving around the country. During the last 10 years, I have moved around 60 districts, working with roughly around 10,000 young kids, school, college, madrasa, university, and some dropouts as well. It's a very complex issue. Complex in the sense it may be a little unpleasant to hear also. Youth by nature is idealistic. When we were young, we fought. We thought that war was a fun. And we just shed our lives. 3 million people sacrificed their lives. What are 3 million people? Most of them are young people who went to war. Because this is a youth romanticism. And they are motivated, but they thought, well, that's the idealism that drove them. Today, the youth is as idealistic as we were when we were young. They dislike dishonesty, they dislike corruption, they dislike deceit, and they also dislike anybody involved with that process. So, why they hate India? One of the reasons is far deeper. All these issues, domestic issues, also get India linked into that process. And they think that India is behind that, number one. Number two, what they are seeing is the new generation grew up in a much more, I would say, liberal environment because of their economic opportunities, the freedom that they have with technology and social media and so on and so forth. So when they see this kind of regression in communal or societal relationship, that affects them badly and they take it seriously. And I hear this kind of sentiments throughout the country. And that's why people, when they see this kind of issue, they just share or they just create an impression, and that turns out as something anti-Indian. Sorry for that, but I think if we really want to improve the relationship, we have to look at it from a holistic point of view. For that matter, I mean a respectful relationship between Bangladesh and India. And people must get that sense. If the young people get that sense, I think India would be relieved at least of one responsibility, that they are not promoting anything bad in Bangladesh, for example. So that could be one recipe, modest recipe from my, I would say, humble, the experience. Second point, I should say that on the Indo-Bangladesh, another problem, border. I think I would say that I'm really impressed by what Vikram has done when he was coming to Bangladesh. Hardly any ambassador I have seen or High Commissioner before that has done it. He traveled by road, came to Akhara border. So that was something outrageous, I would say, initiative for any High Commissioner or any high official coming or taking that kind of adventure. But that now, what he has said is right. Why don't we, I think this could be one initiative, if you like, High Commissioner, if you want to take. Why don't we think of jointly developing economic belt or economic zone across the border on both the countries? Take it 10 miles, 10 miles, 10 miles, or 20 miles, or 2 districts, 5 districts. And if you can do that, that will not only solve our problem of cross-border problem that we have now, it will create a climate or border of peace. And many countries have done that experiment. So why we can't do it? Why we are only talking about border? And essentially when you talk about border, we are talking about 1947 or 71. Why can't we look at 2100? Well, it will be a peaceful border, people benefited from that, and people, as I said, people see the benefits. And then they will, we don't need to go and talk about Bangladesh-India relationship. They will talk about it themselves. So that's the second point I think we can go for if we want to go forward. And that last point, I should say that, what was my last point? I think if people feel that we are, as Abdullah has gone, we have seen the generosity and graciousness of India. And if you ask me, from my very personal observation, I can tell you there are four pillars that worked in good synchronization. Bangladesh government, Indian government, people of Bangladesh and the people of India. Now the relationship is essentially dominated at the government level. People are by and large out of that process. Until we can connect the people, that the box would not be complete, and that would not be sustainable in terms of relationship. We need a sustainable relationship, and we have to work for that. And from our side, High Commissioner has mentioned about the role of think tank. We are ready to do whatever we can do, because our role is to mobilize or generate ideas and then disseminate those ideas. We are ready to do that. And from media side also, Zafar is taking the initiative, means he is giving a prima facie indication that they are also ready to do it. So we are ready to do our part. Let's put some meat and then direction, and then all can work together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Great closing statement. And yes, you get the final statement before we'll send it over to the Commodore for his closing remarks.
Right.
Okay, thanks, Vikram.
So briefly, thank you everybody for all the questions and the views. Let me try again and address a few of the issues that are brought here. To our colleague from the Netherlands Embassy, well, we're always interested in the process of transboundary management of our shared resources. We've been working with, for instance, the Japanese on some of these projects in terms of connectivity. I haven't seen anything specific from the Netherlands on the issue of the UN Water Conference and what could be done, but I'd certainly be willing to discuss that with the ambassador and see what is happening there. On LDC graduation in 2026, look, I mean, obviously we think this is a great thing. It is a wonderful development for us in our region. Not just one, but two of our neighbors will actually graduate at that point of time, both Bangladesh and Nepal. And vis-a-vis Bangladesh, we have already offered the opportunity to have to move forward towards a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, which would have not only chapters on trade, thereby to safeguard the existing benefits through a negotiation process, but also investment, services, etc. So, a much higher order of economic partnership that could be created for both countries. So that is on the table. To my friend Shahab, of course, I think that's very important, how to unpack, how to get the discourse to focus on benefits, which is what I was trying to do when I made the point about connectivity. And that also segues to the point that Aisha Appa also made when it came to the point about correcting narratives. Let me give you a concrete example of how bad narratives actually cost lives. When the Honorable Prime Minister of Bangladesh visited India in 2019, one of the arrangements that was signed was for the transport of gas, LPG, from Chattogram to Tripura. Now, the narrative that got painted was Bangladeshi gas being shipped to Tripura, when it was anything but. Actually, it was gas imported by a Bangladesh company. Actually, at that point of time, it was from Total. It was being bottled by a Bangladeshi company in bullets, those peculiar shaped tanks, taken across the border on Bangladeshi trucks, Bangladeshi bullets, and sold in Tripura. So the net profit was all to Bangladesh. The benefit to us, of course, was even then it came marginally cheaper than taking it all the way around from Calcutta. Now, something like this, if it had been put properly as a narrative, and I'm not shooting the messenger with due respect, Aisha, but definitely not. I'm only making the point that the way this got out, it actually caused riots, and I think the original problem about that poor boy who was beaten to death, Abrar, I think his name was, stemmed from something like this. Now, the reality was completely not true. So that complete incident need never have happened if the narrative had been properly put. Now, who makes the narrative? It is our job in India to brief our media about what's happening. But somebody else has got to do it here. I mean, I can't do it on both sides, right? I mean, I can try, but I'm not credible here if I sing the benefits to Bangladesh, right? So that's an important point that I wanted to make specifically about how energy could be a major unifying force. There are a number of energy-related projects that we've been very keen to take forward, which would be of mutual benefit to both sides. For instance, you are currently buying on the POL through a series of designated providers. These are called G2G providers, right? There's a list of certain state companies who can bid and offer, and you buy from the best price, which is a reasonable system. Now, interestingly, one major Indian PSU has been trying to do this for the last 4 years, to offer this for the last 4 years. Now, the opportunity that we've been pointing out is that our refinery is less than 200 miles down the coast from Mongla. It's at Dhamra in Orissa. That refinery is incidentally capable then of sending it on much smaller vessels rather than Cape-sized vessels, which will then have to be reloaded and unloaded over here in Chattogram or Mongla or wherever. And it is also providing, ironically, the same product to the companies that are already providing it to you. In other words, you're paying the markup for buying it from somebody else. Now, these are examples of cutting off your nose to spite your face. Why would you not want to take it directly? So these are the points that I've been trying to push out here. Now, when we are able to make these points to the public discourse cleanly and obviously, I think it'll help reduce the negativity that there is about this. And now coming to the larger questions that have been asked, which are about social issues and about negativity and things like that. This is more complex issues, and I'm conscious I'm stepping on somewhat sensitive ground. But let me make the following points first. First, about getting the narrative right, it is critical because a fair amount of the narrative, when it is in this country, there is only a limit to what any foreigner can do about his or her own country out here. Ultimately, those actors have to be your own actors. There is nobody else who is more convincing. So if we are being linked up with corruption, and I'm surprised that we are, because I can think of others who might be fairly obviously in the public domain. But nonetheless, if we are, I see no reason why I have to come out and do the look, guys, it's not me bit in public. Surely it should be for your side to do this, not for me, for your elected members of parliament and others to do the honors, not me. insofar as the other bit goes about social complexities, which let me sort of clearly state here, happen on both sides of the border, and it has an equally deleterious effect on my side of the border. Let's not forget, this has happened consistently even after the liberation of Bangladesh, and that the constitution of Bangladesh started somewhere and ended somewhere in terms of after 1971 and 1975, in terms of society here. I'm not raising this on a daily basis to point out how things have changed in Bangladesh, but it is important also to note that we understand that the broad trend of the Bangladesh civil society and government is in that direction. Right? We do not therefore take into account the peculiar statements that are made at Waz Mehfils by peculiar people. We do not take into account the hostile stuff that is said about us on a daily basis in social media. Now, if I were to do that, and if I were to start requesting for apologies on it, I would be doing this on a daily basis. I don't think, therefore, in an equal circumstance, the fact that two persons said hugely insulting things about the Prophet of Islam is at all to be taken seriously, especially as both the party concerned and the government of India have distanced themselves and condemned it. Now, beyond that, these are two individuals who said something that was completely rejected by everybody. Beyond that, what else can the government of India do? I mean, there is a court case already on. There are FIRs that have been filed, first information reports, similar to your GDs. There is a legal process. If there is a prosecution that has to be done, it will be done. Now, this is what can be done in the circumstances. And similarly, in Bangladesh, when something nasty happens, I'm not making an equivalence, but I'm saying we also see that you also take action, and we welcome that. And look, we all live in glass houses in this terrible age that we live in social media. We should all not be the first ones to cast stones. There is ample opportunity then for everybody to be throwing stones around, because social media, and I sorry, Ambassador Saab is gone, but I did not say we should ignore social media. I'm saying we shouldn't believe social media. There's a very big difference between the two. Social media is polluting the discourse. We do need to see it to ensure, at least I see it every day, not because I enjoy it, but because I need to know where the next hit is coming from, at least. So it's important to be able to know what we're dealing with and to be able to at least preempt that. So let me conclude by saying, look, I think it's important. I'm not asking that we put out only good news stories, but I think it's important to at least correct the narrative. When the narrative is wrong, it's important to set that right. Now, the bad stuff is always on, 14-point headlines. The corrigendum or the correction usually sneaks in, after the news is over, and after the talking heads are done their show, and last bit at around midnight you'll get a little corrective that came in. Oh, by the way, this was actually what happened. By which time it's too late. The arrow that is fired is not going to be brought back. So I'm only making the appeal that my effort here, at least these past 2 years, has been consistently to put out fact-based narrative on this. Where there are things that we need to do further, I have consistently acknowledged that we need to do more to improve infrastructure. We need to do more to facilitate greater trade. We certainly have a problem in terms of complex social issues in both countries. And I think it is important to at least give, I'm not saying give credit, but at least give credence to the fact that this is not official policy. And the government has repeatedly stated this. Now, beyond that, in a country of 1.3 billion people, our TV channels are as much culpable for showing one incident and making it sound as if the whole place is on fire. But I've had my friends from Bangladesh visit there, and they're completely surprised to find it's not exactly what they think that social media gets them to believe it. So I'm only hoping that with the 2-odd million people who travel on a regular basis, we can actually start changing narratives about what people think. And I think the only way of doing this, to conclude, is with the famous phrase, seeing is believing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think, Commodore, if you would like to close the show for us, that'd be greatly appreciated.
So we have come to the end of today's session. Once again, from the bottom of my heart, I express my heartfelt gratitude and thanks to all of you, to His Excellency and the panel members and respected audience for sparing your valuable time. I would just say that this session was a wonderful session. We could go for free and frank discussion on very different points. And the points, as any other neighbor in the world, we have a lot of things to cherish, good points, and at the same time, there are a few points where we do not have I should say, that much happiness. But anyway, our High Commissioner has very candidly and very frankly, he has given all the, explanation to all these points. What I would say that there are few points. For example, Ambassador Humayun Kabir has very eloquently mentioned about the regionalism, about the climate change, and then subsequently, for example, Ms. Aisha Kabir also mentioned about the media. We discussed about the narratives, blah blah, many things. I don't want to, bother you again repeating on these things. One thing we did not discuss. That is, as I have mentioned at the outset, that the global order is changing very rapidly. What will be the outcome of Russia-Ukraine war, we don't know. But definitely we realize we are in a cusp of new world order. And now there's a block. Now in this situation, it reminds me about Nehru, it reminds me about the non-aligned movement. Now we have seen how India and Minister of External Affairs skillfully, discussed few points in different international forums and definitely upheld their neutrality in case of this Ukraine-Russian issue. And I think once again, it's a time when India can think about exploiting the soft power, becoming a leader in the non-aligned movement, and we can go beyond even regionalism. So that, under their leadership or stewardship, we can ensure peace and tranquility in the region and peace and tranquility in the world and ensure the prosperity and progress of Bangladesh and India. With this, I thank all of you. Thank you very much. Thank you, His Excellency, High Commissioner of India. Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for joining us here today. There's little refreshment out there in the hall. I'd hope you'd help yourself while you do your chit chat with everyone. Thank you so much.